Each year, the Architectural League's Emerging Voices lecture series highlights the work of a small group of architects and designers who are just beginning to receive critical and professional recognition. The participants are chosen by a jury of prominent architects, critics, and other design professionals, and are invited to give a lecture about their work in New York City. In this podcast, journalist Andrew Blum interviews 2007 Emerging Voices Mark Anderson and Peter Anderson of the San Francisco and Seattle-based firm Anderson Anderson Architecture. The interview took place on March 8, 2007, during a reception at the Urban Center in New York.
You began your lecture by talking about where you guys are from the Tide Flats area outside of Tacoma in Washington State. Why'd you begin there, and sort of how has it influenced your work?
I guess always when you look back on some of your work, you start to recognize influences that come earlier than you might otherwise expect. And the Tide Flats of Tacoma, where we grew up, is an especially important place just in our family history, because we always used to go down there as children with our parents, and at that time they were breaking apart old Liberty ships and steel ships of different kinds and taking parts off of it, and we would go through the warehouses where you could buy old ship's lamps and grates and all sorts of things. So that was our first introduction to the Tide Flats, but then it continued to be a very important part of our life when we became contractors, because it's where a lot of the big lumber mills are in Tacoma, and the steel fabricating plants and all kinds of different things. And then it became important again also because as we were involved in projects in Japan, that was a major kind of port area where a lot of the projects were containerized and shipped to Japan.
And you talked about the sort of the systemic flow of materials, but you didn't call it logistics. What's the difference for you guys?
I'm not sure that we think so deeply about it, that we were making the intentional distinction between logistics and systemic flow, but the one of the very important aspects of the Tide Flats is that it is the delta of the Puyallup River, which comes down from a glacier from Mount Rainier, and it's very evident as a natural system of this mud flat with all of the water running through it that's come down from the mountain, which is looming in a very kind of dominating way on the skyline in that area. So it's at the same time all the trucks and the trains and the ships are running around within their systems. There's also the flowing water and all of the systems of nature that are coming together in that one very rich place. So I think it is almost a poetic interest in the systems that are both natural and industrial at the same time.
I think another kind of flow that interests me about that area is the economic flow. It is the economic engine of the reason for the Port of Tacoma, and things come in and go out, and it's the connection to other parts of the world, other parts of the country, and that kind of basis in the ecology of the economic system that supports the city has always been part of our interest in understanding the bigger flows of money and financing and abilities to achieve projects in the building industry.
And also it led to the development of your interest in prefabrication, but also in craft. How are those related?
The craft aspect of our work is what's kind of always gotten us interested in making things in the first place. When we were little, we would work on building boats, and then later repairing old cars, and we've always been making things in a very direct way. And then as builders, the reason that we became builders was partly just to be involved with machinery and interesting processes, but also because we really loved making things. So the craft aspect is very clear, but it also has a lot of limitations in terms of what can be produced economically. And so we've become increasingly interested in the more industrialized systems that make most of the industries of the world advance in what we think of as the modern world. And really the construction industry is the least advanced of any major industry. And there's so much potential to use industrialized technology to still produce remarkably well-crafted structures, but to do it in a more sustainable way, in a more affordable way, and a kind of a more exciting way, opening up the new frontiers of the construction industry.
And you still have a construction company, is that right?
We do. We started our company when we were in our early 20s, and we've always maintained that. The more recent projects that we've done in a more conventional architect's role, where we have other contractors actually building the work. But we have maintained the construction company, and we do small fabrication projects with it. The frustration that we've often had with just being architects is that we don't get to have the power over the actual making processes, and because of that, we've been thinking more and more that we really need to re-energize our construction company and do more of that. The reason that we got out of it was, as a kind of primary focus of our work, was that we had started to have more opportunities to design projects in different parts of the country, and also because we have become more involved in teaching, and it's not really possible to do all of those things at once. So we're still, we have the construction company ready to do certain things, but we're always kind of moving through different areas of focus in our work.
I think one of the ways we're differently channeling our interest in construction recently is by working with manufacturers and fabricators, so that it's a little bit less hands-on for us specifically, but gives us a chance to do larger scale projects in a wider geographic area. So we've been doing a lot of projects working directly with companies that manufacture major building components and designing around their systems.
You showed a whole series of the projects with the same building system. Can you sort of trace how that system has moved from place to place a little bit?
I think in a lot of our work, we've had chances on relatively small projects, single-family residential projects, to do more experimental work that then has application in larger scale projects. So in the particular series of steel brace frame modular structures, started with a small cabin up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the project there was to design a totally off-grid house that had to be trucked in to a remote location from a considerable distance away. The next stage of that was doing a rooftop penthouse addition to a 32-story building in Manhattan. And even though it's a strikingly different site, the conditions are actually very similar. It had to be erected in a very short period of time and brought in from a remote location. After that, the project, after we developed that steel frame structural system, we found a number of different opportunities to implement it on larger and larger scales. First in a triple-decker 3 to 6 family unit, denser multifamily situation, and then in a number of commissioned projects that are for larger urban scale multifamily housing projects.
And I want to finish with this probably the most poetic moment of the lecture. This house house in Sebastopol, California, in an orchard, and you described the process that you developed the site plan for that house. Can you talk about that a little bit?
This is kind of typical of the way we do a lot of the projects for very special sites. We spend quite a bit of time there, and in the case of the this orchard house in Sebastopol, we went there. It turned out to be on Easter Sunday when we had time to do that, and we bought 2 plastic chairs and a bottle of wine and some good food, and just sat in the orchard trying to figure out what it was that should happen in this orchard. And we started to get to know all of the trees individually, which was kind of a surprise to us, because we thought of the orchard as being a very regular grid. It's a human-constructed natural system, but it's a very regular 25-foot uncentered grid in this case. And yet each of the trees, because they were about 100 years old as the orchard overall, they had a kind of amazingly gnarled personality in every case. And then there was quite a variety, because over the years some of them had died, and there were some middle-aged trees and there were some young trees, and there was a tremendous variety within the very regular grid. There was this specificity to each tree, and that was really the inspiration for the project. We wanted to do a kind of similarly simple, repetitive, regular building, but we wanted to be able to deploy these very regular parts in fairly rich ways, so that we could get the same kind of personality in terms of the light and the experiential effects that would give the same richness to this structured house that was present in these in the great variety within the structured orchard itself.
And that was a way to sort of combine the more system-based ideas of prefabrication with heightened site specificity.
Peter,
I think that's really the undercurrent theme of all of our work, and actually the title of our book that was just published it's called Prefab Prototypes, Site-Specific Design for Off-Site Construction. Our interest in prefabrication and industrialized systems has never been about factory production line output of multiples of the same exact object. It's been about learning to use the tools that are available to us, the new technology tools, to make site-specific projects that are more rationally constructed, more affordable, more respectful of the environment in which they're being introduced.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Emerging Voices is made possible by a generous contribution from USM Modular Furniture. This was a podcast of the Architectural League of New York. For more information about League programs, visit www.archleague.org.